Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Mr. Brown, and I frame this in the context of during the August recess, the highlight was spending time with my wife and our dog Ruby miles and miles into the Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness there, just outside of Yellowstone National Park, enjoying our tremendous public lands that we love and cherish in the state of Montana. I also recognize that outfitters and guides are important partners to our federal land management agencies by helping to ensure public access to public lands. I'm grateful for these guides. A horse looks better and better as you get older and older, oftentimes, to get into some of the backcountry. I say this as someone who grew up climbing a lot of mountains as a kid, but as the knees start to go, the lungs start to go, again, very grateful for what outfitters and guides can do in so many ways across our great state. But could you elaborate on the benefits and values that this partnership brings to the visiting public as well as the managing agencies?
Well, thank you, Senator. I want to say that this has been one of the most successful programs in the federal agencies that, and I used to work for the federal agency, so I think the outfitting and guiding program and the permitting program over the years has been one of the most successful in providing access to people who would otherwise not have the opportunity to experience some of these great resources. So it's been a success. It's been a good partnership. I do think we're starting to collect some additional overburden of regulation and cost, as we're discussing in other aspects of the fee program, that need to be addressed in order for us to be able to continue this partnership.
So maybe we could have you elaborate on that. I've heard concerns regarding some of the challenges surrounding permit renewals on federal land, certainly my home state of Montana. In fact, in your testimony before the House Natural Resources Committee, you said that permit renewals sometimes face, and I quote, runaway analysis from NEPA. And unfortunately, permittees are required to recover those costs from the agency like a blank check, according to one Montana outfitter. How much of that uncertainty for the outfitters and the agencies could be fixed by streamlining NEPA? And so that's kind of the first part. And the second part is, would you have any recommendations on how to create more certainty for those who facilitate access to our public lands?
Well, I think the use of categorical exclusions would help reduce some of those costs. When permits come up for renewal, they have to have NEPA analysis currently. As you know, in Montana and the Bob Marshall, those costs were $100,000 for a group of small businesses, which, fairly significant. We don't know what the end game will be in terms of analysis. The beginning is environmental assessment. In the Passaic Wilderness, they went all the way to a 700-page EIS for about 1,600 people to go into the Passaic Wilderness. Now, cost recovery didn't apply there because they had started the process after or before the cost recovery rule went into effect. But if that 700-page EIS was billed to those outfitters, they wouldn't exist, or certainly the permits wouldn't be issued to them. So, these are the kinds of things that I think we've got to address, and there are a number of suggestions in my testimony of how we can streamline the processes and lower the cost for the renewal of those permits, and even issuing new ones.
Now, you've made calls for more transparency in use of fees. How does that call for transparency and use of fees differ from what is being done currently?
Well, the current reports, it depends from agency to agency and even probably forest to forest, but generally you'll get a glossy report about some of the projects that have been done in a forest, and we just recommend that each fee site report on how much they've collected and where that money has gone. To give you an example, in Idaho, permits were coming up for renewal. Forest Service wanted cost recovery. We said, well, what happened to that more than $1 million the outfitters had paid in fees over the last 5 years? We couldn't get the report. Now, we finally got it, discovered they had spent $200,000 one year counting river users, 10,000 river users. So we need transparency to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen and the fees get used more appropriately.
One last question. I'm going to be out of time here. We are in the midst of and coming through one of the worst wildfire seasons in the western U.S. In history, and that's why forest reform is one of my top priorities here in Congress. These wildfires create closures oftentimes, sometimes in the backcountry or national parks, as well as in our wilderness areas and federal lands, other federal lands. Could you expand, and you're going to have to do this quickly because I'm out of time, how better and more active forest management might be able to facilitate more access to federal land?
No, I think in general, and I'm probably getting off into an area that I'm a little outside of my expertise, but I think at some point you do have to look at the way the agency spends money in general. You know, whether it's efficient, whether the 4-tier organizational structure is appropriate versus a 3-tier organizational structure. And so those kinds of issues are, you know, on a larger scale than outside of FLRIA, but those are things that I think have to be looked at to make sure that the overhead, because each tier of the bureaucracy is going to take a cut of any appropriation, so you don't get as much to the ground. And therefore, you know, you can't have as much access and certainly as much recreation access and other programs unless those efficiencies are improved.
All right.